they utilize the Old Testament, and they feel that they're like the representation of New Israel on the earth. At the very end, when society is so depraved and things are so bad, the 12 tribes, or God's people, are going to have raised up this 144,000 of young men, virgins between the ages of 18 and 24, and they're going to go out into society as like one last effort to save anybody who can still be saved. This is down the road. They're thinking it's going to be around the year 2070. But it was on us. Our grandchildren are going to be the male child. So we're raising the parents of the male child. So, our children have to be they have to be raised 100%, be willing to give their lives for this purpose, that they're going to be raising their children to be a part of this 144,000. It was pretty shocking to me at first. I didn't come in not knowing that they spank their children. This was just like a normal part of life, like making rods. Like people would just have this like soaking in their bathtub. It's weird the things that can become normal to you. You're expected from day one to start training your children that by the time they're 3 years old, that they can stand quietly in the menha the whole time and pay attention. So it literally starts when they're babies. Kept saying, I just want to go home. I just want to go home. And the man looked at me and he said, "You are home." And I looked at my husband, and my husband said, "We're not going anywhere."
Mine is the only voice.
What have I been doing?
Lay down my autonomy.
After that, it got very dark very quickly.
Hey guys, my name is Shalise Ansola, and this is Cults to Consciousness, where we discuss leaving high-demand religions or organizations and finding healing and independence through awareness and true individual sovereignty. If you're only listening on those podcast platforms and you'd like to see our faces and join in on the conversation, you can go to YouTube at Cults to Consciousness. We love it so much when you guys can interact with the post. It's the best way to support the show, and obviously our guests who are coming on and sharing their stories. They're real people, and we so appreciate them doing so. Today's guest, I was extremely excited to be connected to her. You guys have been asking me to cover this group for so long, and I just hadn't found anybody yet. And so today we're talking about the 12 tribes. You may or may not have heard of them. You may or may not have eaten at one of their cafes called the Yellow Deli. I myself have eaten at one, so I'm excited to talk to her about this. But she also wrote a book, All Who Believed, and it's a great illustration of actually joining a cult in adulthood, being sucked in because of the romanticizing of the lifestyle, and how eventually it just became a complete nightmare. So thank you so much for joining us, Tamara Mathieu.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yes. Yeah. So show everybody your book that you wrote. Came out just over a year ago.
Yep. This is my book, All Who Believed, a memoir of life in the 12 tribes.
How has it been since releasing your book?
It's been really good. Yeah, it's been fun. I've been able to be in contact with so many people who either had been a part of different groups or families that have children or other relatives in the 12 tribes. And it's been nice to be able to reach out to these people and kind of give them an understanding, of maybe how to communicate, with their loved ones who are in the group and I've been able to do a few other podcasts, which has been great. So yeah, it's been a great year since the book has been published.
Do you know of anyone who has written a book about the 12 tribes, or are you the first?
I'm the first woman to do so. There are 2 men who wrote memoirs about their experience. One is called Better Than a Turkish Prison. Then the other one is, I think it's called God's People. And that was written by a man who brought his family into the 12 tribes. Their names are Sanasta Kaluchi. He's the one that wrote the Turkish prison one. And then it's Stuart Lavin wrote the one called God's People. But they're the only ones that I know of thus far that have written books about the 12 tribes.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be out there so much as far as getting an inside look into what it's actually about. And I was so interested to read your book, and I was right up to the part of going back to your high school reunion, and then
Mhm.
child had a meltdown, so I had to
Mhm.
stop reading. But I'm looking forward to finishing it and really just getting an insider's look on the absolute complete control in every facet. And we're going to go over them. But I think first it's important for our audience to understand who the 12 tribes is, because in reading your book, I'm thinking, wait, this is Christianity, but then I'm seeing similarities from our Hasidic guests, our ultra Orthodox guests, and I'm going, is this Judaism or what's
Right.
going on? So could you explain that to our viewers?
Right. I mean, I tell people that they're basically a fundamentalist Christian group, but they utilize the Old Testament and they feel that they're like the representation of New Israel on the earth. So they call Jesus Yahshua, which is the Hebrew name. And back in his time, he was celebrating all of the traditional festivals such as Passover and Yom Kippur and Yom Teruah and those traditional like Jewish festivals. So the 12 tribes didn't start out incorporating those things. Like those things came about during my time there where they like gained revelation that, these were holy festivals. It was never meant to be that the followers of Jesus or Yahshua would no longer celebrate these festivals, that they were part of like our father's people on the earth. So, and we did Israeli folk dancing, which they had done long before I joined the 12 tribes. So the whole thing was kind of like a combination of Christianity and Judaism. There was a lot of each.
Okay. And we'll get into more of the specifics too in a little bit. Let's talk about your upbringing and basically what you felt was lacking in your life to make you want to seek out or look into this group.
So my upbringing, like I wasn't raised religious. We didn't go to any church regularly, or I didn't really have any of those kind of beliefs like instilled in me from my family. But I just had my own belief from the time I was a little girl that there was a God. I wouldn't say that I was really actively searching until I met my husband at college, and he came from a Pentecostal Christian family, and he very much believed, in their system of beliefs through that church and really wanted me to believe as well, because part of that belief is thinking that non believers are automatically condemned to go to hell. And I just really struggled around that concept. I couldn't believe that. I was never drawn at that point, but I did try. I went to church with his family and read different books and things like that. But then I had a child and then everything changed. And then I really just started just feeling like I wanted more for my child. I wanted like the safety and security, of like I don't know, like at the time, he was only maybe 5 weeks old. There was the Columbine high school shooting, and that was, like, one of the first, school shootings that was, like, publicized, and I remember watching the live footage and, like, knowing now, like, I'm responsible, like, for this tiny life, and, I was gonna have to send him to school one day, and just picturing the parents, like, at that moment, like, not knowing if their children had been killed, like, it really just had a profound effect on me, and when I, did meet the community, it was only, like, a few weeks after that, when we got married, that I met a lot more people and started being introduced to the group, and, it just seemed exactly like what I wanted, like a family-centered, kind of, old-fashioned, simple life, really wholesome, like good family values. I wasn't like, "Oh, yay," like a Bible-believing group, that wasn't what the big draw was at first. But, since my husband was Christian, and I just kind of thought, well, maybe I maybe I can believe this way. And the way the 12 tribes seemed to really live according to how the Bible explains, how you should live. I thought, well, they're really putting their money where their mouth is. Like, maybe this is like the true thing. And I had been, like I said, reading things and having a lot of conversations with people who were Christians, just trying to, just as the community would say, groping or seeking or just really wanting to know what to believe in, and a lot of the testimonies of people there are similar to mine. It's like in that place of seeking, like that's when you met the 12 tribes. So it was like that's when God like stepped in and answered your prayer and showed you like this is what you're supposed to believe in. And I'd never had like an emotional experience like attending any kind of church except for maybe like a negative experience, which I did talk about one in the beginning of my book. But being around the 12 tribes was so different. Like I loved being at their households and around their women, and I just felt like so safe and comfortable. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop reading their literature and, wanting to go back and asking more questions. And, I'd had that thought, like that's why I didn't really pursue Christianity or going back to church. Because after I went to church with my husband's family one time, I was just like, okay, like, yeah, that was fine. Like, I thought if that was the truth and God was calling me, then there should have been more. I should have been
Mhm.
like, "Oh, can we go back again next week?" Or then there was nothing. But it was so different when I met the 12 tribes. I was just like so interested, so just excited. I just had this excitement, that I'd never felt as far as something like that was concerned.
Can you explain to our viewers what the 12 tribes is as far as what it visually looks like, how it really is its own isolated community? This isn't just a church you go to on Sundays, it is a full on lifestyle.
Mhm. Yep. So, their original, or maybe not original, but how after however many years of the group forming from like a small Christian community, and then they started getting more and more revelation of who they were, the ultimate goal was to reestablish the old 12 tribes. So back in old Israel, there were the 12 tribes. Those are the 12 sons of Jacob. Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, Manasseh, Shimon, Levi, Issachar, Zebulun, Yosef, and Benjamin. I'm getting a little rusty, but but so there was a song that we sang with our children to memorize the 12 tribes like that. So they have the whole world. Literally, they have the entire globe separated into these 12 tribes. The 12 tribes are established. They have their geographic locations all over the world. And their goal in Revelations, it talks about the 144,000 pure young male virgins that are going to be sent out to preach the gospel at the end, like when the world is about to end, like at the very end, when society is so depraved and things are so bad, the 12 tribes or God's people are going to have raised up this 144,000 of young men, virgins between the ages of 18 and 24. And they're going to go out into society as like one last effort to save anybody who can still be saved, because people will just be over the waterfall at that point. Society will be so bad, and they're not going to be met. You know, they're not going to be met with happiness, and people are going to hate them. They're going to be slaughtered. They're going to be like murdered in the streets. And it's when the last of these are murdered, the last two messengers, they go out and they're murdered. And that's going to be the moment that Yahshua is going to return and gather up his people. So, like, that is like the end goal, is raising up what they called the male child. And, we always knew, like, well, we're not part of that, and our kids aren't part of that. This is down the road. They're thinking it's going to be around the year 2070. This is down the road. But it was on us. Like, our grandchildren are going to be the male child. So we're raising the parents of the male child. So, our children have to be like, they have to be raised 100%, with this goal, and be driven, and, be willing to give their lives for this purpose, that they're going to be raising their children to be a part of this 144,000. And, you're going to have that faith, like as a grandparent, I'm going to watch my grandchild go out and be slaughtered. My children would have had to have that. I'm raising my son that he's going to be willing to go out and be slaughtered for this cause. And that's like the biggest glory, like you know what I mean? Like that would just be the most amazing purpose for their life.
That's a lot of pressure. And that's also very real and tangible if you're putting a year on it. And I think in your book you had mentioned there were previous years and then it just keeps getting pushed a little bit and they're like, no, this is the right math.
Yeah, the previous years was when the race would start, and the race is 49 years until the end, till when Yahshua returns. And so the community started around 1970. So then they got this revelation that it took Noah 100 years to build the ark, and they were like, well, it's going to make sense that it's going to take us 100 years to build our ark as well. And so, it just so happened that they were ready to start the race in like 2021 or something like that. So, and then it puts the 49 years at 2070, which is 100 years from when they began.
So, in practical terms, and tell me if I'm missing something or getting something wrong, it's basically communal living, multiple
Yes.
families in one home. You basically get a
Mhm.
bedroom for your family, or maybe two bedrooms. Everyone has different chores, everyone has jobs to do, and it completely consumes your whole day. And this is something that you didn't necessarily know what you were getting into until you got into it. A quick break to talk about the sponsor for today's video, Superpower. When I first started my pregnancy journey, I went into the OB and I was like, hey, what are some tests we can run? I want to optimize my health before trying to get pregnant. She basically said she couldn't help me and she ran some tests anyway, never called me with the results, and I just felt as lost as ever. Superpower puts the control and information back in your hands. When you sign up, you'll do a quick lab draw for their panel, which has over 100 biomarkers. It covers heart, liver, thyroid, hormones, and so much more to give you the full picture perspective of your health. Now that I'm a toddler mom and on another pregnancy journey with its ups and downs, I really need all the help I can get. It feels so empowering knowing all of my levels and how to maximize my health with a full customized plan laid out for me. My superpower score is 83 out of 100, which I'm very proud of, and my biological age is 7.4 years younger than I actually am. This is my favorite part. My longevity advisor laid out all of the recommended supplements for me based on all of my biomarkers, which I can buy directly through them at better prices than Amazon. It's time to take back control of your health. For a limited time, they're offering our viewers $50 off their annual subscription by using the discount code CULTFREE. Just head to superpower.com and use the code CULTFREE for your exclusive discount. Your biology decoded, your blueprint activated with Superpower. After you guys check out, they will ask you how you heard about them. Please support our show by letting them know that C2C sent you. Thanks, guys. Back to our guest. So you talk about in your book everything that you had to go, first of all, convincing your husband. And he's like, okay, sure, you have to get rid of the family dog because pets are not allowed. You learn more about that later.
Yeah.
And then you talk about all the things that you had to give up. So can you explain what some of those are?
Yeah, I mean, the first things were just like most of the clothes that I wore were not, acceptable. Most of the toys that my child had were foolish or whatever. Women don't wear jewelry. So we came with the bare minimum from our life. We had like a few simple items of furniture and dressers, not very much. We had a whole house. It was a small house, but we had a house, and we basically sold or gave away almost everything. And then, I got there and the women, they had like a couple of bags of clothes for me, and went through Emmett's toys and got rid of the things that were deemed foolish. Yeah, just started weeding through, getting rid of more. And it's not like our needs weren't met at that time. Like, I remember like a package of underwear, being acceptable underwear, because my underwear were not the kind of underwear that we wore there, but they got me new underwear, and we had to get rid of a bunch of Emmett's books. And one day there was a stack of books on my bed, like acceptable, like animal, nature kind of books. So it wasn't like when I moved in, they were just trying to make this void and not fill it with anything. And it
Mhm.
wasn't like they came down on me like, "Oh, well, why did you bring this?" Or something like that. Like, everybody was nice, and just, it was like in a helpful way. And
Mhm.
and I know they were trying to make us feel welcome as best that they could. And as time goes on, it's like the it gets tighter, tighter and tighter. Because when you first move in, you're not a baptized member, and you're not going to be held to the same level of standards. Like living in the house, yes, there's certain standards they're going to hold you to. Like I wasn't going to come down in a tank top and jeans. Like I knew that much. I was going to be held accountable to the standard of modesty. But they couldn't really hold me accountable to the standard of child discipline until I was a baptized member.
Mhm.
And then once you're baptized, it's like that's seen as a marriage. You are marrying the body of Messiah, and you're saying, I give my life to this. I give my life to this purpose, and I want to know God's will for my life every day. And well, how does God's will come to you? It comes to you through your brothers and sisters, of course, because God isn't going to come down and like speak to you personally, but to your brothers and sisters who have the Holy Spirit. They're the ones that God's will is going to come through. So then once you're baptized, now I'm a sister, and now if my brother or sister come to me with something, then I now have to accept that what they're saying is God's will, and I'm making that vow.
And that can get tricky really fast. And I want
Yes.
to talk more about the community specifically, but just to paint everybody a picture, can you talk about the clothing standards, what was allowed, what wasn't allowed, even down to the undergarments in your book? I was like, wow, that's really specific.
It's very, very strict modesty, and it's also they also want to have like a unique look, They want people to just be able to look at you and be like, "Oh, those are the 12 tribes." In their eyes, we're God's people, we should stand out. We should be peculiar. That's the word they like to use. We're peculiar, but not in a bad way, in like a good way. And because of all living together, there's like single men in the group, and they were always the ones that were used. We want to keep our single men's minds pure. So women had to dress very modestly. We sewed our own pants. So we were allowed to wear pants, but they were like super blousy pants, like harem pants or hammer pants or clown. People
Hmm.
called them clown pants, just very, very full and very baggy, gathered at the ankle. Skirts. We could wear long skirts, long dresses, but they had to be full as well. And we always had to wear bloomers underneath. We could never wear like any kind of just like a stretch knit t shirt. There had to be some kind of like tunic over it or like a handmade blouse, which were always very roomy, made of like stiffer fabrics like linen or cotton. And just, I mean, by the time we left the community, the standards had just they had changed, and like there were so many rules about clothing. It came down to like colors and patterns, and then it came we were told all of our sleeves, even summer things, they had to like cover our elbow. Necklines had to be above the collarbone. You know, we were expected, if something was white, to have like an undershirt underneath it because you didn't want to see like any outline of a bra. I mean, it was down to little girls too. I just remember having to like add on pieces of lace to my like little girls t-shirts so that like it would be down to their elbow, and just very, very, very strict clothing standards. That was something that like teenage girl might get corrected on a lot was
Yeah.
was wearing something that that was immodest, and it really wouldn't be immodest, but this our standards were very high clothing. And men had standards too. Like we prayed at the end of every gathering. That's why I chose this as the cover of my book, The Hands in the Air, because at the end of every gathering, people would put their hands up. And when I first joined, it was only the men who did that. By the time we left, it was men, women, children, everybody raised their hands. So when you put your hands above your head, you don't want your shirt like riding up that people can see skin. So men were expected to also wear shirts that were long enough that when they put their hands up, that they were still covered. And they weren't supposed to wear like short shorts. So we usually would just get pants and like cut them like below the knee to make shorts for men. So, it was simpler for men. Men could wear a t-shirt, but there were still standards in place for men and women. And it was hot. My first
Yeah.
summer there, I gave birth at the end of July and just wearing this, like, heavy linen dress with, like, bloomers underneath it and an undershirt and, like, I was so hot.
Yeah, I'm sure. And not only the we don't want men to stumble, the part that stood out to me was you can't even have an underwire bra or a lace bra because it may make you feel sexy and then you'll put off the energy of
Yes.
being that was wow,
Yeah,
that's next level.
that was the underwear thing. So when I moved in, I had a lot of bikini underwear and, I was told that it could cause you to give off a sensual spirit if, like, even underneath your very modest clothes, if you're wearing, like, sexy undergarments, then that could somehow come through in your essence and how you're presenting yourself to people. Very simple as far as that went. We, just wore, like, very standard bras. Yeah, no underwire. I don't Some of the things I didn't really understand, but at the time, wasn't gonna make a big deal out of something like that. I figured that there was a good reason for it, and I didn't come in knowing everything, so I just, like, trusted people, and
Mhm.
I was pretty compliant in that way for a long time.
I want to mention some of the red flags that you noticed early on that you talked about in your book that you either chose to ignore or they had explanations for them, and then you realize later, oh, they were just trying to shield me from some of this to get me to, I don't know, be more willing to come into the community.
Yeah, so, I mean, the first red flags to me was to do with the children and discipline. It was pretty shocking to me at first. I didn't come in not knowing that they spank their children or even knowing what they use. We called them rods in the community, but it's just like basket weaving material, and we'd get these huge spools of them, and you'd have to, like, soak them in the bathtub and then, like, straighten it out and cut 18-inch sections, and then we use, like pipes, like piece PCP pipes or whatever they're called, and stick in like a whole bunch, like jam them in and then pour linseed oil in and close it off, and then they would, like, soak so that when you pulled them out, they were completely straight and, they were still flexible, but when they come in the when you first order them, they were in these spools, so they were very curved. This was just like a normal part of life, like making rods. Like, people would just have this, like, soaking in their bathtub or whatever. Like, it's weird the things that can become normal to you over time. And I see the look on your face, like, it's so weird, it is so, so weird. Just getting used to children being spanked all the time, our very first room in the 12 tribes was in Hyannis, Massachusetts, and we were the only bedroom on the first floor. And so our room was bordered, like, by 2 bathrooms, actually, and taking your child to the bathroom, that was, like, a common place to, like, go and discipline your child. Like, if your bedroom wasn't really close by, if you're working in the kitchen and your bedroom was, like, on the 2nd or 3rd floor, you didn't wanna have to haul up and down stairs every 10 minutes, like, when your child disobeyed you. So, a lot of times the bathroom, or if it's, like, really little children, you just keep the rod right there on the kitchen counter, and they didn't obey you, and you know, spank their hand or whatever. So I was just getting used to how strict it was, like, and you had 2 gatherings a day. So there was morning and evening. And the gatherings could be anywhere from, like, 20 to 40 minutes maybe on average, a typical, like, weekday gathering. And you're taking, I had a 17-month-old, and you're expected from day 1 to start training your children that by the time they're 3 years old, that they can stand quietly in the menha the whole time and pay attention.
That's insane.
So it literally starts when they're babies, training them that you're quiet during this time. So that was hard. Taking my energetic child who'd, like, had run of our house for his whole life, and now he's expected twice a day to be quiet and pay attention. um, it was really hard. It was, and to have him in the kitchen for hours a day, and that was probably the most culture shock for me, was just acclimating to being a mother of a young child in the 12 tribes,
Mhm.
and just what that lifestyle is like. I just went in so naive. I obviously had been around enough and helped enough that I knew that, everybody had a supper night, and, everybody had a laundry day, and there just seemed a lot more togetherness, and I saw like a lot of support, but then I suddenly felt like a lot of times I was doing lunch day alone, and I, I had Emmett, and it would just be like, it was so stressful. I like couldn't wait for him to take a nap, get him down for a nap, rushing out, trying to finish up as much as I could before he woke up and he had to be in the high chair again. And, just like disciplining him all day long, to like our children were supposed to be at our side doing what we're doing. It wasn't in the culture to like, oh, I have to go make salad for lunch, so I'm gonna set Emmett up over here and to play with his toys, while it was like, no, like from the time they could stand, they were to be like with you washing the lettuce and ripping it up, and then after that, then you go on to the next, and then you clean up, and like in theory it just sounds so good, like you're giving your child a productive will, they know that you care for them, and there is a a lot. My granddaughter is 4, and if I'm in the kitchen doing something, like she's asking me, "Nana, can I cut? Nana, can I do this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course." Like there is something, and especially that age children, that they love to help out. And so I'm always like, set her up, but she might do it for 10 minutes and then she's done. And I'm like, all right, yeah, great job, go play. But it was like we were starting at really young ages to teach them to complete their deeds. And there was none of that. If your 2-year-old had been doing something for 10 minutes and then they started throwing a fit because they wanted to do something else, you had to spank them and bring them back. And you're putting into them to not have their own will, to just be completely surrendered to you. There wasn't any like, "Oh, well, they're 2, take a break, go out for a walk." It was like this was good for them. This was raising them, to be surrendered.
Yeah, there were so many instances. I probably took the most notes on all the policies around children because it
Mhm.
was so shocking to me that even using the word play was not allowed. Not only are they not allowed to play, but you can't say, go play with your blocks. It's, we're going to work with blocks. And you
Yep.
couldn't even allow them independent play. And well, I want to build the tower this way. You had to instruct them, this is how I want you to build the blocks. And I found that so interesting and sad for these kids who aren't able to even have an imagination. I mean, even using their imagination was against the rules. And that
Mhm.
was like they couldn't even pretend to hold a baby doll because that's using your
Nope.
imagination, or like so many of those things where I'm just thinking these kids were not allowed to be kids.
No, that was fantasy. Like, they weren't allowed fantasy, so to pretend that something is a doll, or, to pretend that something's a baby, you know, I have my mouse here, to be like, how a little boy might pick up something and pretend it's a vehicle, like, no, that was fantasy, that was not allowed. Yeah, they definitely were not allowed to be kids in that aspect, and the reasoning behind not using the word play was that we didn't want there to be a negative connotation between work and play. We wanted our children to be surrendered and content no matter what we were doing. We didn't want them to think that, like life isn't just about playing and having fun all the time. Like, most of the time we are working, and it wasn't like we wanted to make it like a drudgery. We would try to find ways to make something that we were doing in the kitchen fun, or turn it into a little game, or something like that. But yeah, for the most part, we were working, and I don't really think that that was successful. That our children didn't have any type of like difference in their brain between like, yeah, sometimes we'd go to a playground Of course that was more fun to them. Or going swimming in the pond, of course that's more fun to them than folding their laundry or mopping the kitchen floor. Like, you can't really get that out of their brain with, like, not using
With labels.
certain verbiage, you know? Some things are more
Yeah.
fun, and that is a part of life, that is fine. But it's just crazy the aspect of control, that caused us to even go to those lengths.
Because it seems like they were trying to raise brainless soldiers, I guess, for the end times,
Mhm.
because not even being able to have a say of what to eat. I mean, you told the story, and I'll just let you tell it about asking your child what she wanted.
Yes, that was an example of, dinner that night was just, like, a bunch of different leftovers. So, I didn't really have a preference if my child had one leftover versus another leftover, so I asked her which one she wanted, and I had somebody, come up to me later on, to rebuke me that she should be eating what I choose for her, that I shouldn't just be, allowing her to eat whatever she wanted. And it stuck out to me because typically, you know, there was one dinner made. Like, my children were raised, there was one breakfast, one lunch, and one dinner made. They didn't have any choices. We sat down to every meal, and it was either served to us or it was, like, set up, at the end of the dining room, and the mothers would make up all their family plates, and, children were always served. So it's just like this one random instance, where there's a little bit of a choice, and, I got rebuked for that.
Or how the children weren't even allowed to ask for food in general. Did you find that hard as a parent? I mean, my daughter, we taught her how to sign, and she's always like, hungry, mom. And
Yeah.
so, how did you deal with that as a parent?
We were told that we were always supposed to be one step ahead of our children. We were to be if we were like, if we were being a good parent, if we were being a caring parent, then we would be anticipating our children's needs. We would know if our child needed a snack or that they were going to be hungry, and we would be one step ahead of them. When my children got home in the afternoon from training, we called school training, like, I should know, okay, they're gonna come home, they're gonna be hungry, they're gonna walk in the door, and I'm gonna be able to say, "Here's your snack." They're not gonna have that opportunity to come in and start, "I want this, I want that, I'm hungry, can we eat?" No, that's not allowed. But, but we weren't trying to, incriminate them, so that's where being one step ahead of them was, like, a good thing. If I wasn't
Mhm.
one step ahead of them and they came in all saying they're hungry and asking if they can have this snack and like, that's on me, like, I was at fault. Like, I would still correct them, and say to them, like, "No, you don't come in here demanding food. I'm gonna take care of you." You would still say that, but then, I would wanna do better the next day and make sure, that didn't happen again. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, our children were never supposed to, like, seek their own will. They were only supposed to say to like, What do you want me to do next, Ema?" They weren't supposed to ask, like, "Can we go for a walk later? Because then if we did
Yeah.
it, then it would be giving into their will. Like, in their mind, they would have gotten their way,
Yeah.
but they were always just supposed to be surrendered to what their parents' will was for them.
That is so much pressure for you. And just in normal circumstances, forget all of your responsibilities in the community. Just as a mom, to always be on top of things like that is difficult. And now you're basically a full-time stay-at-home working mother.
Mhm,
So I think it's really relatable, especially the way you talk about it in your book of how you were longing for community. You just how great would it be if I wasn't home alone all day while my husband was working and I had people to talk to and I had people to share my
mhm,
childcare with, and how great would that be? And of course, that sounds awesome. I
right.
can relate to that, just wanting to have another mom come over to do a play date so I have an adult to talk to. It would be awesome. And but then when you get in, you realize that that's not what's happening. You would kill for a moment to be bored because
Yes.
now they are filling your day,
Yep.
just 12, 13, 14 hours of work, and you have your kids, and you have all these expectations of how to be the perfect parent and raise the perfect submissive children. It's just overwhelming. And I know that you had that moment of, holy shit, what have I done? I need to leave. So let's talk
Yep.
about when you had that feeling come up.
Yeah, and I only had one child. Okay, a lot of women in the community have 5, 6, 7 children. So you take these strict standards and then multiply that for these huge families, women are just like exhausted. It's anyways, but yeah, so I finally got baptized. My husband, he gained faith and he came to the moment that he expressed his desire to be baptized, before me, which was ironic because I'm the one that wanted to go there very badly in the first place. And so once he got baptized, I realized like, okay, like we're doing this, like why would I put this off, I was very open with the women there, like, there are like really kind, nice people there. If everybody had come across like an asshole, you know what I mean? I never would have wanted to join. Like there are very wonderful, sweet, kind, understanding people, and there were women that I would go to and talk to and, express to them, like, how badly I was suffering, how badly I was missing my dog and my friends, and, like, just how hard things were, and they were really kind and patient, and they would tell me, like, "You don't have the Holy Spirit. This life is hard, and it says in the Bible that it's gonna be hard." Like, there's a verse, and I can't remember now where verses are in the Bible, but the verse is like, "Don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal." Like, if you're serving God, don't be surprised that it's going to be a hardship because if you're a disciple, you're going to be tested. It made sense. They're telling me, of course, this is hard for you. You're doing this in your flesh. You don't even have the Holy Spirit, and yet you're trying to live this life like in your natural. Of course, you can't do it. That's why you need the helper. That's what the Holy Spirit is there for. You can call upon the Holy Spirit, you can call upon Yahshua, and our Father is going to give you grace. He never gives people more than they can handle, but you haven't surrendered yourself yet. So you're not even getting the grace. You're doing all, I'm there trying to live that life without grace.
Yeah.
It made sense. So I'm like, of course I have to do this, I can't do this on my own. I obviously need the Holy Spirit to help me. And so it was that same, Andre got baptized in the morning, and by that evening, I like got up the courage to speak in the gathering and say that I wanted to surrender my life, and I got baptized that evening. There's this whole celebration, and they do a skit, the Lost Coin skit, and there's like dancing, and it was like you just felt like like royalty or something, and people are just so happy for you. I mean, I had like 60 people, like just, tearfully, just like so happy that like we were their brother and sister now. And you just feel so much love and encouragement. So yeah, like the first few days after that, like felt a little better. Like I'd go out in the morning and pray and like things did seem a little bit better, but I think that was just endorphins or I don't know because then, after like a few days, maybe it was more than a few days, I don't remember. But anyways, a little bit of time passed and I started suffering again and just not knowing if I'd received the Holy Spirit because like things were still really hard. And so then what they would say to me was, now you have the Holy Spirit, now you're a threat to the evil one. So now you have this opposition you have to deal with from the evil one every day, who's now whispering in your ear, wanting you to look back at your old life and but now I have to overcome that. I have the Holy Spirit, I can cry out for grace, but now I also have to overcome like the enemy whispering in my ear and causing me to lose faith. So there came a weekend came up where we were sent to the community in Rutland, and Andre's relatives that that lived in the 12 tribes, his cousin and his wife. They had lived in Hyannis, and I'd gotten to know them a little bit, but then they moved. And her and I were the same age. I talk about her in my book, Joanna. Our little boys were the same age, and we were both pregnant. So yeah, I was newly pregnant too at this this time of like, the first few months and living in the 12 tribes. So we went to Rutland, and like there's, it's 12 tribes there. So we were able to like go to the breaking of bread with them, and we'd visited Rutland as guests for like a year. So everybody was just so ecstatic. Like we were now baptized members, and my mom came and visited us there for the first time, and everything like was really nice. And then on the way back, I have some relatives that live in the like White River Junction area. That's kind of where my family's from. My dad's there, and we stopped at one of my aunt's house, and it was like Thanksgiving time, and she'd started like putting out her Christmas decorations, and it was like the first time I'd seen, like those members of my family since we joined, and it just hit me like we'd always had this big family Christmas. It was always a really special time. I looked forward to it every year. I had like younger siblings that I always loved the holidays with my family, and it just like really hit me that I was not going to be there. That's explaining to my grandmother. It was just it really tore me up, and as we got home, like, closer to Hyannis, I just, like, was sinking and sinking and sinking, and, um, we were I was pregnant, and I was still nursing Emmett. I was trying to wean him at night, so, some of the people there were like, "Okay, well, this is how you wean him at night, like, when he wakes up, it needs to be just your husband that goes to console him because, obviously he can't nurse him. And like if I'm not even in the picture, it's only going to take a few nights. We just happened to have this like little loft space in our bedroom, so I'd put a mattress up there. So I was sleeping up there, to go through this however many nights it took and to wean Emmett at night. And we got home, and I just, like, climbed up in that loft and just, like, curled up in a ball and cried and cried, and then the next morning, I was just a mess, and so, Andre must have found, like, another woman to watch Emmett for a bit, and he got another brother, and they came in the room, like, to have a meeting with me, and I was still just crying. I was just a mess, and I kept saying, "I just wanna go home. I just wanna go home," and the, um the man looked at me and he said, "You are home." And I looked at my husband, and my husband said, "We're not going anywhere." And, like, that's the moment now of, like, my anxiety dreams, like, I still have dreams that I realize that we're back in the 12 tribes, and I'm trying to find my husband, and I finally find him, and I always say, "I just wanna go home," and then he's like, "Well, I have this meeting to go to, and the women are waiting for you in the kitchen to start dinner, and, we're not going anywhere." And then I wake up, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay." But yeah, that moment, and that was 4 months. That was 4 months into living in the 12 tribes, and we were there for 14 years.
14 years.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, what choice did you have? Especially because part of their doctrine is being completely submissive to your
Yep.
husband, which
Right.
isn't uncommon in these cults, like 99% of them. But to the extreme of your kids are not even your kids, they're your husband's kids. And if he tells
Yep.
you how to do something for the child, whether it's feeding or this is how you need to parent, you can't even correct him and say, oh, they already ate. You have to say, yes, I will.
Mhm,
I'm just
mhm.
like, what? That makes no sense.
Exactly. So, yeah, I somehow stuck it through. His cousin's family ended up moving back to Hyannis, and then I felt like I had a friend, at least, like, I had one person that I knew was, like, for me, and so that helped, just different things happened that I kinda got over the hump and accepted life, and, I mean, at that point, we were so young. I had a toddler, I was pregnant. It definitely would have been, like, a walk of shame to, like, leave then and come home to, like, my parents or something like that, like, "Oh, we made this big mistake," because some of my family had
Mm.
tried to tell us before we
Right.
moved in, like.
How about the cult deprogrammer that they were trying to hire?
Right. Yeah,
It's
and,
like,
like,
no way.
So, there was all that too. It's like we were so young and I was already like able to be a stay-at-home mom and we'd already bought a house in Burlington, Vermont. My husband was already doing really well for our family and it was really, really hard for him to give up all that, and then it took a lot for him to finally do it. And then it was like, and then he was 110%, like this is what we did that you wanted to do this, we did it. This is what we're doing
Yeah.
now, and so yeah, that was a tough pill to swallow, and I never had the courage that it would have taken to have left without him.
Yeah. And I think it's important to talk about the ups and downs because when you're in a cult, a high control group, it's never all bad. There's always
Mhm,
something that kind of tugs at you, or
mhm,
you have this question and then you feel like God has answered your prayer. And so you're like, okay, that's my confirmation that I need to stay, or whatever it is. Or if it's the members who are trying to coax you to stay or love bombing you, I feel like they love bombed you to get you in. And then it was a little bit of a rug pull. But all that to say, in your story there were so many one step forward, two steps back, where your your mother-in-law moves to the community, right? And you're like, oh,
mhm,
this is great because now my kids are going to be, they're going to have another parent basically to take care of them. It's going to be so helpful. But then there's the rule of, well, they're not allowed to get close to her because she's not baptized yet, and so it's
mhm,
not really helpful. And then she's so busy anyway that
mhm,
she doesn't even have time for you. It's like,
right,
what? Just when you think you're moving forward in a positive direction, something pulls you right back again.
mhm. Yeah, and I don't think you got to the point in my book where my grandmother moved in.
I
So
did,
oh,
yes,
you did? Okay, yeah.
which was a positive thing at first, right?
It was. I mean, that was totally like I totally took that as a sign from God, I mean, I had 4 little children at that point. I'd just given birth to my 4th child, and I just remember one night, he was probably, like, 6 weeks old, he was little, and he had just been crying, and it was the middle of the night, and he's crying, and I was crying, like, I was so overwhelmed and tired, and, like, I don't know if it was like a voice that came to me or it didn't seem like it was like my own thoughts, but so I somehow heard, "You don't have to do this again. Like, I don't have to have any more children. I can stop. I can do this one last time. I don't have to have any more." And it was so comforting. So I took such comfort in knowing like, "Okay, I can do this one more time." Like,
Mhm.
I had had some girl tell me back when we first joined, she was, like, 14, that, like, women were supposed to have, like, 7 children. And, it's coming from a 14-year-old girl, so I didn't, like, took it with a grain of salt, but it always kinda stuck with me, like, "Am I gonna have to keep doing this? Like, keep giving birth?" And, like so I was really comforted by that, and then it wasn't very much longer that I got a call from my grandmother. She had come to visit us several times, and she always really enjoyed her time with us, and I remember she called me up and said, "How does your community feel about old people?" And I was like, "We love old people, why?" And she's like, "Well, do you think that you would have a room for me?" Like, she moved in, and I really felt like that was an answer to prayer, and, like,
Mhm.
I said this in my book, like, it could have been, like,
Mhm.
it could have been an answer to prayer, like, I still believe that there is a creator or a god, like, some type of entity. I don't think anybody really knows what, but I believe that there is something that from the depths of someone's soul, if they're asking for help, so, looking back, I'm like, "Well, that could have been God helping me," not because I was in the 12 tribes and, but just
Yeah.
because I was like a desperate soul on the earth, like, you know? So, but, of course, when you're there, it's like, "Okay, this is our Father blessing me," like, he's bringing in my family members from the outside, like, I'm on the right path, I'm doing the right thing, like, this is
Mhm.
definitely confirmation that, this is where I need to be, and, my grandmother, she stayed after we left, she never left, she passed away in 2019, like, still a part of the group.
I can imagine you being so overwhelmed, and I haven't been in the situation with 3 other children and a newborn, but I know what it's like to have a newborn and all of those feelings that come with that, being a new mom and all of the responsibilities that you had on top of that. I want to take a moment to talk about what it was like going through pregnancy and essentially giving birth there and all of the responsibilities that you had. I think the one that stood out to me the most was anything that you were needing or wanting during your pregnancy was you just being selfish, and that you had to suffer. It was like the whole point of pregnancy was that you could overcome your suffering, and I'm like, just help the pregnant woman. This is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything that you needed. I had the specific example of for my first pregnancy, no, my first pregnancy in the 12 tribes, I was brand new. That could have affected, more like how they were treating me and like the special things they were getting for me. But I remember during my first couple months of pregnancy, they were very accommodating. They would every week this man would go out and he would buy me like a couple package of like cubed steaks, and they'd put them in the freezer. And a couple mornings a week there was a woman who would like make me steak and eggs and like serve me this wonderful breakfast because I felt sick. And a lot of times what we ate in the mornings was like big bowls of fried vegetables with rice or millet, and like just the smells of fried onions and peppers when you're newly pregnant and you walk out of your room. I mean, oh gosh, it was bad. So they knew that I was suffering, and so they made accommodations for me. They got me cereal and milk, and I was able to go to the cafe every day and get like a yummy peanut butter protein powder smoothie, and they would make Emmett a little smoothie. They'd take the leftovers of mine and give him this little cup, and he loved that. And so we get to go for that walk every day, and Emmett loved that. And so there were things that, you really did feel like cared for. But then it was very different when I was in Cambridge pregnant for my 3rd child. And, I went to a woman and, told her, like, "I'm feeling really sick in the mornings, this is what helped me out before, like, is there any way?" Like, I thought that I was, like I didn't think that I was going and demanding or, I just thought I was going to a friend and, like, just asking. And the next thing I knew, my husband and I were brought into a meeting with like the 3 or 4 head midwives of that community, and they totally rebuked me. One of the women, I'll never forget it, she just looked at me and said, "I've never heard of anybody being so selfish as to demand red meat when they're pregnant. Imagine if we had to get red meat for all of the pregnant women." And she said, "Pregnancy is a time to suffer and overcome. And out in the world,
Jeez.
women are pampered and they give in to all of their desires. But here, this is a time, to like their whole symbol of like the end times is this pregnant woman like about to give birth, like to represent the birth of, the body of Messiah on earth. And she overcomes and puts her enemies under her feet. And it's a pregnant woman because that's when like your emotions are the most crazy and you feel all haywire and everything is out of balance in your body, and like that's the most amazing time to be able to overcome and to not give in to all of that, put your enemies under your feet and like be steadfast. So and I just had to sit there and listen to story after story of, well, this woman, she could only eat oat broth. She was so sick for the entire pregnancy and she never stopped giving thanks. And, you have it so easy compared to her. It was all to make me recognize that I was just being selfish.
Mhm.
That's
I
crazy.
was just wanting to give in to my flesh. But it was
That's
actually it
crazy.
was literally like nutrition for my
Yeah.
pregnant body. I wasn't asking to like go to a foot massage or what I mean, like something really just pampering and luxurious. Like I just wanted like I just wanted some iron.
Yeah, and you even went to a homeopathic doctor and they were like, "Yeah, you need red
Yes.
meat."
Yes.
And she still said, "No, they don't know what they're talking about."
Same woman, she laughed and said, "That doctor only has worldly knowledge. She does not hear from our Father." That was the response I got. Yep.
So aggravating, and you just have to sit there and smile and take it. I
Yes.
love the moments in your book where you stood up for yourself and you're like, "No, you listen to me." But then you always got reprimanded and you ended up having to apologize even though
Mhm.
they started it, and I was just like, "Ah, this is so
Yep.
aggravating."
Mhm. Yep. Nope, you never reacted. You were never supposed to outwardly react.
Let's talk about the function of these communities. So there are multiple different communities, and I noticed from your book they're all different depending on how much money they're bringing in, how many luxuries they're willing to afford or they're able to afford. And one in particular, spending winter, where you're only allowed to have the degree set to 50 and occasionally 60 twice a day. I was like, what? How is this? How is this happening? Especially when other communities had other luxuries and you weren't even allowed to have the heat on. So let's talk about how those all kind of were connected, but then separate. And I think it's kind of complicated.
Well, it was the goal of each community to be autonomous and to have their own industries and to support themselves. And it wasn't unusual for communities to support other clans. Like in Cambridge's heyday, when the soap shop was making lots and lots of money, there was money going out to all sorts of poorer places like Brazil. Like the communities down there were super poor. But at the time, I think it had a lot to do with the people that were in authority, like the government of the Rutland community. I think they were really just trying to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and not wanting to be like beggars, like going to the brothers in the Massachusetts community. Like, I used to wonder, like, because we had just come from Plymouth, where it's not like I ever lived like high on the hog in the 12 tribes, but in Plymouth, it wasn't that hard to get our needs met. If my child needed shoes, usually got shoes pretty quickly. You made your needs list and gave it to the women that were going shopping every week. And for the most part, we got what we needed. And, we lived in a place where you only asked for what was needed. You weren't making these lists of all this extraneous stuff. So, when we ate, I remember eating pretty well in Plymouth. And then we went to Rutland and it was just like it was like entirely different world. Like they were so, so, so poor. I remember wondering, like, do they ever tell people in Plymouth, like, how we're living here? Do they know, like, we can only have olive oil on our tables for the Friday night meal? Like in Plymouth, we always had olive oil on the tables, like little things like that. We only ate fruit, you know, on Saturday mornings in Rutland. Like if we got like a case of bananas or a case of oranges, like those were off limits, those were saved. That was for the Sabbath. So you couldn't ever like give your child like a piece of fruit for a snack. And like I said, things just become normal. Like we acclimated to that way of life. I just got used to having my little daughter in her snowsuit all the time and a back carrier on my back, like hat, full on everything. Emmett wore a hat all the time. And we didn't even live in the house that had like a working shower or bathtub. So like to bathe my little children in the middle of winter in a house with no heat, I'd have to like get all their things together and take them to a different house to give them a bath and then bring them back. And it was forced hot air in the house that we lived in. So when we did turn the heat up, it was an hour before the gathering, morning and evening, we could turn the heat up to 60 and you would hear it kick on. And they would run over and they would sit in front of the vent on the wall, like in anticipation of like when the heat would come out and they would just
Yeah.
like bask in this heat. In the house that I lived in, we really tried to take care of each other. I luckily lived with the family of the man who was the baker at our cafe. And so because he was baking all the bread, they'd slice up the bread for the sandwiches for the customers and the ends, like they couldn't really do much with those. So he would bag up all the ends and he'd bring them back to our house. So we would have like these bread ends and his wife would like siphon off like a little bit of like sunflower oil from the kitchen, and we would toast these bread ends like in a frying pan with like some oil. She would just like scrounge change, and there was like a Beer King. It was called Beer King, but it was like a little convenience store right around the corner. Like once she had enough change, she'd like, I'm gonna go for a walk, and she'd like head out to that store and she'd buy us those like little cartons of milk. And we would have like this whole milk, and then we would make tea and put this whole milk in it. And it was just like such a treat. But it was, it was kind of like our little household secret. Like we had these bread ends and we had this whole milk, and we wouldn't have gone and like broadcast that, to the other households. There were 3 households there at the time, and so we'd put our children down for a nap and we'd like go into the kitchen and like be making up this stuff. And it's weird as it sounds, it's like those are like some of my like good memories, of kind of being like in camaraderie with somebody, and we were all in the same boat and nobody was better
Mhm.
off than anybody else. Our room was so cold at night that we would have like a glass of water for we all slept in one bed so our children didn't freeze to death, but like our glass of water would have like a coating of ice like on it by morning
Jeez.
because there were no storm windows in the house. So my children like to entertain themselves. The entire window would be coated in like those crystals of ice, and then they could draw in it with their fingernails.
Gosh.
And that was like fun. That was like something fun to do in the bedroom.
Yeah, it's just so interesting that you have this community living that way, and then other communities are living more lavishly, but somehow they're all connected. So I guess I'm trying to piece together, is there someone at the top who is benefiting from all of these different businesses that you were creating, that you're sending money to? Or is it truly just a scenario where this thing was created and then it morphed into something else because everyone's trying to out holy each other or whatever, and it just
Mhm.
became really high control? Like, how did this happen?
I think there was a lot of morphing involved. It was not as strict. People would talk about, like, oh, yeah, back in the days, we would do these camping trips with everybody. And, they would talk about things from years ago that I would think, wow, that sounded so much better. Or like before they had the 2 gatherings a day, and they would just have like mealtime together and discuss things over the meal. And I would think, like, wow, that sounds a lot nicer. Things definitely morphed over the years. It was like, and the way they saw it, it's like our Father is just giving us more and more vision of how to be his people. And so, of course, things have to come in increments. They weren't going to start off on day one with the whole picture. And so, over time, they're gaining in revelation. We're becoming more our Father's people. He's going to continue to give us new direction until we're exactly the perfect representation of him on the earth. So of
Mhm.
course we're going to keep hearing new things and be given new direction, and we're going to keep being raised to a higher standard.
So are there people at the top who are receiving these revelations, or everyone through all the communities would receive these answers?
They say like hear from the least, but it was definitely mostly the leaders, that they called it the anointing, like oil trickles down from the head. So it's like the people at the men, the leaders at the top, who are going to these like apostolic meetings and hearing, especially hearing the teachings from the leader himself. He died in 2020, Gene Spriggs, but he was like the apostle, like he was him and his wife are the ones that started the group back in the 70s, and I believe a lot of the teachings came from him, although there are other men that were involved in teachings, writing teachings as well. So yeah, like the men would meet together in these meetings and they would hear from our Father, and then they would each go back to their respective clans and they would pass on the fresh vision, of what they heard. So, any person in the 12 tribes has a voice, and, you could go to somebody and be like, hey, I have this burden on my heart, and this is what I've been thinking about. I think our Father is, you know, putting, helping me see this or that maybe we could do this different. And it's not like you wouldn't have been heard. Like, they for sure would have been like, "Oh, that's wonderful, thank you for coming," and they might even bring something up in a meeting. But ultimately, it's the leaders at the top that, have final say.
And the first apostle that you mentioned, Gene, he wasn't even living the same way as everyone, was he?
No, that wasn't always really apparent. Like we lived with him and his wife in Plymouth. It was definitely apparent that they weren't on the same level as the rest of us. Like I never saw her out in the kitchen at 4 o'clock in the morning putting together sandwiches for the work crew going out. I remember one day, Gene had gone to like Salvation Army, and he liked to go on dollar days and he liked to buy clothes for the men. And he came to my room and he had pants for my husband. And they seemed normal in that kind of a sense. But, they definitely had like the nicest rooms in the house and their own vehicle. And they weren't on any kind of household schedule. And they kind of came and went as they pleased. As far as, all the money in the group, like, yeah, I think definitely are people at the top, that are in charge, that are like managers of industries or things like that have access to that money that definitely misused it or used it more for their families or things like that.
Yeah, so ultimately, it's more like an MLM versus one nefarious cult leader who has ill intent for his followers.
Right. Yeah, because I'm sure there were people that helped him and his wife in their, day-to-day lives, but I don't think that I mean, I could be wrong. I was just a woman in the community. Like, I don't think that he just controlled all the resources for all the 12 tribes all over the world, that it all just like went to his bank account or
Hmm.
something like that. I don't think that it was so much like that. I don't know how he and his wife got allotted funds. I really don't know.
Okay. Your husband, Andre, became a leader in the community. How did that affect you in your day-to-day life? Did you feel all eyes were on you? Were you held
Oh,
to a
yeah,
higher standard?
absolutely. Yes. You're absolutely held to a higher standard if you are the wife of a leader. And one of the criteria for leaders is that they were supposed to have their families in order. If somebody's family was a wreck and like their children were leaving or whatever, that person might be scaled down a notch and taken out of authority. So it was a very high standard to be married to somebody who was a leader. The expectations were very high. You were really expected, to be supporting him above all. Like that's your purpose as a wife, is to build up your husband and be his helpmate and support him, not the other way around. Like your focus is raising his children to be godly offspring, and he's serving God as he's being called to. I remember being rebuked by one woman. She felt like I was pining for him to be around all the time. And it's like, why aren't you thankful that your husband has such a high calling to God? And why can't you be the kind of wife that is building him up and giving him the ability to serve instead of trying to hold him back?
Yeah. There was a darker part of your book, if you're comfortable talking about it, the idea that you didn't even feel worthy enough to be his wife and you
Hmm.
would rather an accident happen and him
Hmm.
marry someone else than stand in his way. And I feel like, wow, that's such a heavy piece to really chew on and think about, because it's clear that you're so overworked, you're so overwhelmed, your husband's not around. The husband that you wanted to join this group so you could be with him more, and
Hmm.
now it's the complete opposite. So if you want to talk about how that was making you feel.
Yeah, we were just really encouraged to like give up our husbands to meet the needs of the body. And yeah, I did join thinking that we were going to be like more of a tight-knit family, and it definitely didn't, pan out like that. And so I just got to the point that I felt like I'm never really going to get it. I'm never going to be to the point of faith that I see these other women being at. And I'm only holding my husband back. And like, if this is true, like, it was always an if with me because I was kind of always vacillating on the edge. Like, if this is true, if we're really the body of Messiah, and the God of the universe is really needing my husband to function in this way, and I'm holding him back, I better off not being his wife. Like maybe, we're not matched up. We're not a good match in this way. Like he like took off as a leader. He was very well spoken in gatherings. He spoke a lot, and people went to him all the time for counsel and to confess their sins. And he was really sought out because he did care. He cared a lot about people and wanted to help. And it was like an easy role for him to step into. And I just felt like I was not at his caliber at all. And so I totally thought like, well, surely there's another lady here. There's a better community wife, that can do all these things that I'm being told I need to do, and somehow I can't. I'm falling short. I can't do it. So yeah, I started to pray like that. If I was going to be the downfall of my family, that I wish God would just take my life. Like it was rare
Jeez.
that it was rare that I'd be in a vehicle by myself, but I like vividly remember this one time I was driving somewhere alone and I thought, now's your chance. Like I'm alone in a vehicle. If I got in an accident and died right now, it's not like my kids are I would never want anything to happen if I had somebody else or my kids and I remember thinking like, I know my kids will be devastated, but like I'm sure God will provide them like, somebody better than me. Like I'm obviously not doing a good job raising them. I'm constantly, being rebuked for, you know, for how I'm being as a mother and how I'm being as a wife. So yeah, I definitely reached like a really dark place at that time.
That's really the ultimate feeling of unworthiness, of wanting it to go to that level because you didn't feel like what you were doing was enough. And
Mhm.
it's so sad to think about that because you were doing everything and some, and you were being a better mother, and that's why you were getting in trouble, not because it was the opposite, not because you needed to do better. It's you were doing things that felt instinctual for you to help your kids or give them a better life, and you're being punished for it. So, what was the moment then where you and your husband realized, you know what, I think we need to leave?
Well, he had a great sense of responsibility to the soap shop. Like that was an industry that he helped build up from a very, very tiny industry to like a huge booming industry where they were doing private label for like some big companies. They had some huge contracts. Like I said, Cambridge was able to send out money to all these other poorer places, and he really felt responsible for that. He
Mhm.
really felt like if I leave, this whole place falls apart, well, then all these people are going to be suffering on my account. So, and our children were growing up, so being a teenager is not easy in the 12 tribes, and things were coming up, not even bad things, but it was like seemed like every other day there was like another, you know, like my son got in huge trouble for reading Tom Sawyer, and he got caught listening to country music in a vehicle. It's like all those kind of things are huge, huge ordeals. And it was, I just didn't even feel like ever leaving my room. Children weren't allowed to talk to other children without an adult being present. So you constantly had people coming to you like, did you know your daughter's talking to so and so in the other room? It's just, you're so under the microscope. I was just getting to that point of like I didn't know how to face the day each day. And I think my husband started to like see through some of the hypocrisy at the top and see some of the infighting amongst different leaders and things like that. And I think he really started to become disillusioned. And then they moved a couple families to Cambridge, and there were a couple men who my husband felt confident could take the reins at the soap shop. But what the community did, and at that time, was say to us, "Hey, we'd love your family to go down to Arcadia, Florida. There are only a couple families down there. They really need help. There's like a 60-year-old man trying to support them doing pool jobs all by himself." And like they presented this scenario where like our family was really needed, but they knew we were on the edge. They knew that we were thinking of leaving. So, but we were like, okay, like we had never done something like that as a family, It was like it seemed like such a great adventure. My children still look back at this time as like a really great time. We drove down to Florida and we made stops along the way and went camping and went to a zoo and went to the ocean and went to Assateague and saw the wild horses. And like we just did all this stuff that we had never, it was like vacationing for the first time ever, and our
Yeah.
oldest was 15 years old. And it was like we were just like enjoying being a family and doing things. And we got to Florida and we were there for 6 weeks. And, at first it seemed like, okay, I could live here forever. Like, this is great. We had 2 cabins like out on the back of the property. There were only like 6 people who lived there. We were going from this community of like 70 people to like, there were 6 other people besides us. And we had like our own cabins. Like, it seemed luxurious. But the next thing we know, there's people coming down from the Fort Myers community to rebuke me that a Nancy Drew book was found in my daughter's bedroom and that my 9-year-old had like a regular swimsuit that I was letting her wear in the pool, and I bought my children Greek yogurts one time. Like, all the things were just starting to like, and then my husband found out that they were planning on having us leave there soon and go move back into the Rutland community. And I think that's when he was so like,
Mm.
absolutely not. Nope, absolutely not. We are not doing that. And so we packed up at 4 o'clock in the morning one day and drove back up north, and that was that.
Where did you land? Where did you go?
My mother's house in Highgate,
What
Vermont.
was that like? What was it like walking in and being like, "Hey, mom."
Well, I called her ahead of time. Like,
Yeah.
she had a heads up, and it was a few days for us to get there. But it was a very difficult time. We had nothing. We had like a van from the community. So, and he wanted to do everything by the book. He could have taken money, vehicle, like, I mean, we could have set ourselves up pretty good, but he did not want to be accused of anything nefarious. We took no money. We, as soon as we could, got our own vehicle, gave them back the minivan that we were using. And but we had nothing. We had like our clothes, our children's clothes, some camping mats, a tent, some sleeping bags. Um, Nothing. We had to start completely over. We had no like job history for 14 years or income tax information. It was like we had just crawled out of a hole with like a full-on family of, 2 teenagers and 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. Yeah.
There's clearly so much to cover here, and I want to know more about acclimating into the real world with all of your kids, especially having teenagers, having nothing. I think it's such an important discussion to talk about the actual leaving and basically how you ended up where you are today. So I would love to do a second episode with you. Let's do a quick Linda listen moment before we close out.
To the group, what I'd really like to say is get over yourselves. Like, you're not saving anyone. The world is not turning on account of any of your poured out lives, and you're damaging countless people through fear, guilt, and control, and traumatizing children through physical and emotional abuse. Your tactics are not representative of God's love, but of man's arrogance. And no one there is free to be who they were meant to be, because true freedom celebrates individuality, not conformity.
Well said. That was great. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing more of your story and more of how you were able to acclimate. How can people find you and support you?
So I have a Facebook, Tamara Mathieu, author, that I put updates about podcasts that I do or different book signings that I do. That's also linked to Instagram. I get people reaching out to me through my email. I get people calling my work, reaching out to me. So those are pretty much. I should do more with social media, but I just haven't.
It's a lot. I get it.
Yeah.
Totally get it.
Yeah.
So, this has been fantastic. Do you have any other final thoughts before we go?
No, I think we'll just go into it on the next episode.
Sounds good. Well, thank you guys so much for
Yeah.
watching. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell so you don't miss when the second episode comes out. We're going to talk all about her deconstruction and basically starting over with her family. And if you want to support the podcast, just interacting with the post is the very best way. Liking, sharing, commenting, even if it's just an emoji. We appreciate those words of encouragement for our guests here today. And we do have a Patreon at patreon.com/cults to consciousness. We have some merch at cultstoconsciousness.com. And if you like this video, I'll link 2 more down here below. We're going to try to get some more people from 12 tribes. That would be amazing. And obviously check out the next episode. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.